everybody. Welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. Today's special guest is Jonathan Baker. He's a partner at the company Punctuation, where they work on helping companies get ready to sell, specifically in the digital marketing and agency type work. But I think a lot of his information will be great for everybody. So welcome to the show, Jonathan. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for making time for us. Ryan gave a real quick overview of who you are, but you want to maybe go a little bit further into depth on how you got into what you do and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I ended up in Atlanta, Georgia, started a brewery with some friends back in 2011. And
that was before it was popular.
It was good, yeah. I mean, it was before the big boom, certainly. Yeah, it was back when there were, people were still asking what an IPA was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you can't go anywhere without a dozen IPAs on the menu.
Grew that company to, we're now at 6 locations, 200 plus employees. But it got too big for me to enjoy. I have 2 business partners in that business. So they're running that day to day. We went through an M&A process years ago and got left at the altar. But through that experience, I kind of fell in love with M&A and realized it was a lot more than I thought it was. And it's much more than a spreadsheet, much more about relationships and strategy. And saw an opportunity to join my father 4 years ago at Punctuation to help build out and put a little bit more rigor behind an M&A practice. So we work exclusively with marketing services firms, usually small to mid-sized, always independent. But the type of work we're doing in M&A, really most of the concepts will hold true for any professional services business.
Just for clarification, we're talking mergers and acquisitions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And if I was a little more clever, I'd come up with some different.
Well, that's okay. No, I think it's interesting, or maybe we should add a little bit of context. People who've listened to this show, I mean, we've had other people talk about M&A specifically, but one thing that I think is a superpower for your organization, you mentioned going to work with your father. He's a well-known guy in sort of the positioning space. And it's interesting. Well, maybe it's not that interesting, but maybe it's more obvious than anything, but it's like positioning is such a huge part of being able to sell a business or choosing a business to buy. Like, I mean, getting your company set up sort of foundationally correct in the first place is a huge part of this. So it's an obvious dovetail that you guys had worked together, but you want to talk a little bit about just sort of what you're bringing to the table in terms of mergers and acquisitions. And then maybe I would consider a lot of the work that your father does, for people who aren't familiar, David C. Baker, is kind of preparatory to the work that would be required for M&A. So I wonder if you could maybe just talk a little bit about you guys' process at Punctuation and how that works.
Yeah, we operate more as advisors than brokers. And so we're trying to coach people through the entire process. We help firms with their own positioning, as you mentioned, service offering design, lead generation plans, kind of roles and responsibilities within the organization. Because we've seen the inside of so many firms, we also do a fair bit of benchmarking. And a lot of the things that make a firm profitable and fun to run are the same things that make it easier to sell for a higher dollar amount. And positioning is one of those things. So, if you've got a small, tightly positioned firm, think about who the buyers of that firm might be. It's going to be other mid-sized firms, right? And they want to buy something that they can't easily replicate. So they don't want to buy another small full-service firm. They have those capabilities already. What they want is some kind of deep expertise that would take them, time and energy and money to create, or maybe access to a certain client vertical that they don't currently have strongholds in.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. Cause I mean, and maybe I'm just a novice. Like, I came into the business world sort of through the back door. Basically, I was a designer who got laid off, who needed to do something for work. So I started an agency that does creative work. And so our business has basically been built from the foundation of, a designer who doesn't know anything about business, who basically has been able to build business based on reputation and, doing good work for people and referrals and things like that. But as you mentioned, expertise or being able to buy something, in the spirit of mergers and acquisitions, if you're trying to buy specific expertise or you're trying to buy into a certain vertical, for example, our business doesn't really have that, right? By virtue of the fact that we've always been kind of a catch as catch can, and as business shows up, we take it and that kind of thing. We've been able to be a little bit more selective in our older age, but still, I mean, we take a lot of work that wouldn't necessarily be seen as within a vertical or within a niche, right? We're kind of broad. And so, which I imagine would make us a little less appealing to a company who's just trying to fill a gap in their own business. So can we talk a little bit then about, sort of maybe the early steps? If you take on a business or a client who maybe comes from sort of a non-traditional background, I imagine there are plenty of people in marketing who just set out to start a marketing company. But I also imagine there's plenty of people, or at least I know plenty of people who've spun up marketing companies, after getting laid off from an ad agency or something. And so I wonder if you'd talk just sort of about maybe businesses that are set up in more of a non-traditional manner and how you can sort of help course correct those guys.
With an example being yours.
I mean, that's fine. Or, I mean, if you have a case study that you've maybe already worked on or something, that would be fine. We happen to be in a similar genre. So even if you're just spitballing, you could probably use something like ours, but I'm not looking for free consulting here.
Hey, use the podcast where you can, buddy.
I think a lot of businesses do start out like yours, and obviously you're going to take the work if the work is there and you need it. But positioning is not really about the type of work you do. It's about the type of work that you tell people you do. And it's a transition over time, right? It's not like a point in time. Now we are tightly positioned. But you change your front door and you say, these are the types of things that we're trying to do. That doesn't mean you're turning the other work away. That just means you're not advertising for it, right? And positioning gives your service offering, design, focus. It certainly gives your lead generation plan and marketing plan focus. It just makes a lot of those decisions about where to find clients, where to actually spend the limited time you do have a lot easier. So it can feel daunting, right? Like, if I'm only doing, only working for musicians, then what do I do with all this other work that I have now? The answer is you keep it, and you change your positioning one client at a time.
So would that be, say, for example, I started life as a DJ, 26 years ago, and gradually over time I've evolved into recording arts, recording bands, doing live productions, stuff like that. I didn't just not DJ anymore. I just kind of, still took those gigs, but I changed my focus to where I want to be doing more live audio, where I want to be doing more of this. In your world, maybe you started off with a batch of beer that you liked and it turned into a good food menu. Is that kind of, am I down the right track or did
you're definitely down the right track. One of the key differences between a person doing that and a business doing that is a business has a lot more overhead, right? And so there are decisions that kind of have to be made. So one thing that positioning also does is gives you the insight to set up your business structurally in a way to support the type of work you want to do. So you don't, you might not necessarily want to grow beyond a certain size, right? And positioning is going to kind of help you achieve that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's especially funny because, there's a lot of experts out there that talk about, needing to niche your business down. And I think that's alluding to the point you made in M&A, which is we're trying to fill a gap or something. So if I know what you do and what you do is something I need, it's easier to pick you out of a crowd versus somebody who's maybe, more broad. But so many people have trepidation around this notion of niching down or better positioning or, becoming more narrowly focused for fear that they're missing all the other work, right? So they have this notion in their head that they need to be open to everybody and they'll get everybody's business. When the reality is, if you have a narrow focus, not only does it work maybe better for the reasons you suggested, which is you have limited money, limited time, limited whatever to focus on these things. So if you only have to talk to one audience, that can be useful. And, and then also just by virtue of talking to this more narrow group of people, more focused, you're likely to get more business than you expect. And so, but for some reason, people really struggle with this ability to niche or maybe even choose a direction to go.
And you charge more. You can charge more if you're an expert. So you need less work over time to make the same amount in revenue. When from an M&A perspective, the difference between being a small, poorly positioned or kind of jack of all trades type of firm and a small, tightly positioned firm, yes, you're going to have a larger potential pool of buyers as an unpositioned firm, but that pool of buyers is not going to be willing to pay you top dollar. So your smaller pool of buyers is going to be it's going to be there for a well-positioned firm, but they're going to be the ones that are willing to pay a higher multiple, maybe give you better terms. And frankly, they're easier to find if you're the one kind of seeking out potential buyers.
Sure. Say, for example, you're kind of at that position where you have an existing business. You're kind of getting to the point where you either want to move on, do something different with your life. You're looking to actually maybe get your business acquired. What are some steps that you should take in the early process to kind of just get the ball rolling, maybe get the books set up right, get your clients on. What are the main steps to focus on as maybe a design firm and maybe someone who doesn't necessarily run a firm and is just looking to change?
Yeah, I think for any professional services firm, one of the first steps is making sure that your books are set up correctly and clean, because any valuation, anyone looking at your firm is going to go back, at least 3 years, just digging into your books. And so you need to make sure that your chart of accounts makes sense, that you are not running personal expenses through the business. Now, maybe you are, and maybe there are certain tax advantages to doing that. If that's the case, just make sure that you can justify those and kind of show your receipts when the time comes.
Yeah.
Make sure you understand your balance sheet. The balance sheet ends up being where a lot of the skeletons are buried in a business, and owners have, sometimes very little reason to look at the balance sheet, right? But it's one of the two most important financial documents in a transaction, and it's certainly going to factor big. And so make sure that you've got a clean balance sheet as well. The other thing I like to recommend to folks is, there are certain expenses in EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Any of those 4 buckets of expenses, it's really nice to be able to pull those out and have them below your net income as kind of other expenses, so that you have a truer read on what your business might be worth at kind of first glance.
Okay.
So that's one thing. You mentioned clients in professional.
Do you leave them out of the equation until it's until the acquisition's actually going through?
You certainly don't want to tell them anything yet. But in terms of your client profile in professional services, the two things you're really selling are your people and your clients, the relationships there. And so if you have one client that's 75% of your business, for example, that's going to represent a pretty high risk to a buyer, because if that client walks away, what do you have left? And so you want to work to get your client profile in a position to where you don't have a single dominant client. And I recognize that, quickly growing firms are usually quickly growing on the backs of a client, and that's fine. Like, don't say no to that work, but know that it's going to, result in maybe slightly less favorable terms when it comes time to sell, unless you can kind of course correct.
That makes
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I wonder, we've been covering a variety of categories here, but maybe to focus the conversation a little bit more, could we go through the process of like, I'm a new client. I just came to Punctuation and I've hired you guys to do the work. What does that relationship look like? So from what I could gather from some of our research and early reading, I mean, obviously you've got to have a stakeholder heavily involved. Like you mentioned earlier, you guys are really more coaches than brokers. So, I mean, I imagine there's sort of a consultative relationship, but I wonder if you could kind of take us through the process, soup to nuts, of how it would be to work with somebody like you, and some of the, decision making steps that have to go, either into sort of the before I decide to work with you or before you accept me as a client, how do I prepare? And then, once you've accepted somebody, what does the road look like?
Yeah, so it's usually, I would say, a 6 to 12 month process overall. Um, at the beginning, the first thing we'll do is evaluation of your firm, and that's a flat fee. Usually takes 3 to 4 weeks, and that gives us kind of permission to have an opinion about how sellable your firm is, what we think the terms might be, and then have a conversation with you around all of that, right? If after the valuation stage, both parties are like, yeah, we both kind of agree that this feels fair, and we're going to obviously do our best here, but this is where we think we'll net out. That's when we would create marketing materials and take the firm to market effectively. So we've got a database of buyers that we curate and keep updated. We also have a newsletter, the 15,000 agency principles that we send notes out to, and then we'll do custom research. But that process usually is 2 to 3 months of really active sales, and that is very much focused on us. So we are the front door. We're vetting everyone. We'll then bring you into a conversation if we've got kind of a serious potential buyer in mind, and carry those conversations forward through negotiations. At some point, we might have a stronger potential buyer who submits a letter of intent, which is shorthand, or the shorthand is LOI. And at that point, if you can agree on the LOI, then you would sign that, and then you're kind of, I mean, it's like an engagement ring. You can still back out of it, but you're only pursuing this one buyer. And then due diligence occurs, which is usually 30 to 60 days. And it's a horrible process that is a necessity. But, you're opening up your books, you're sharing spreadsheets of all of your trademarks, you're, going through all your benefits packages that you offer employees. You're just opening up the hood effectively. And then if all of that goes well, then you end up closing. So it's usually 6 to 12 months all in, but a good portion of that is just sitting around waiting.
So I wonder, so you mentioned you guys aren't like truly a brokerage and there's kind of a coaching element here, but I wonder, so given the fact that you've, put together this list of sort of qualified buyers and things like that, like, are you steering companies to the buyers, or are you rather trying to suit a buyer to a particular agency? So the reason I ask is, let's say a marketing company comes to you and they are looking for some help in getting sold or getting bought anyway. And they, I don't know, have a specific set of skills. Like, are you matching them up to the buyer, or rather are you saying, okay, well, I've got a buyer, but they need X, Y, and Z, you're pretty close. Could we just kind of steer you in the direction and make you a good fit? Or maybe it's both.
A lot of it depends on understanding the seller and their personal goals. So why are they selling? Is it to get more time out of their, to spend their time on something else? Is it because they need to hit some kind of retirement number? Is it because they're tired of doing the mundane day-to-day stuff and they want to take that stuff off their plate? And understanding the seller's motivations helps us craft a plan to pursue buyers. So what we don't artificially narrow the funnel of potential buyers, but we might change our focus on the types of buyers we are targeting, and that will change as we go through the process and have conversations. It's a lot like dating, right? Like you date someone to find out what you don't like in a person.
Yeah.
And so,
Usually takes about a year and a half to figure out.
Yeah.
Well, and then I suppose if you're into brunettes, you're not shopping a ton of blondes, right? So it's kind of that thing, which is, if you're an agency that focuses on, I don't know, pharma, you're not shopping them to a company that does automotive marketing, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So you talked about something though in that, which was this idea of sort of, understanding a buyer's motivation. And I want to talk about how that relates to sort of the emotional impact of sales for some people. Especially with businesses that are sort of single owner, or maybe were started out of a passion or something like that. I imagine you run into a case where you've got somebody who's passionate about their business. It's the love of their life, and you can maybe never match a valuation up to their emotional valuation of their business. So I wonder if you could talk about just sort of the emotional impact in terms of establishing a valuation, getting deal terms correct and things like that. How do you work with people who are just in love with their business and not maybe, or maybe struggling with, actually letting go?
Usually people who are that in love with their business aren't trying to sell.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
But there is certainly a very strong emotional component. It usually doesn't come up during the valuation process, though. It usually comes up during due diligence, and then, the period of time before due diligence when you're kind of courting multiple suitors. And it's, there's always a point in the process where it just feels like things are going to fall apart, right? And I don't know when that's going to be, but it always seems to happen. And very often you can fight through it and find a way forward. But because this is, a very personal thing for a seller, it's more personal than selling a house, for example. And it's more financially beneficial than any other decision they would make in their life. There are just these huge emotional swings of will it happen, will it not happen? Our job is to try to shield the seller from as much of that as possible, right? And to kind of coach them through it as a therapist when we need to. But having been through the process so many times gives us kind of a little bit of wisdom in terms of what to expect and when, and what's, yes, this is a normal time for them to push back on this, and I'm not concerned, but we do need to respond in this way. Just kind of being a voice of reason throughout.
Yeah, so, I think that makes sense. Well, and I just wanted to ask, sorry, Mike, to cut you off. Yeah. I just wanted to add too, I imagine that sometimes maybe it's emotional or otherwise, but there's probably a chasm in this valuation bit where it's like, I don't know, if I'm selling my old Volkswagen, I think it's worth more than the market does. And so how do you sort of parse that thing where, I believe my agency's worth 10 million because look, we did all this stuff. I think it's awesome. And you guys come back with the numbers and it's worth 4.5. Like, how do you bridge that sort of chasm with people, or does it really not come up that often? Are people
and then maybe break down the actual evaluation process of how you would come to a number to begin with.
Yeah, so that certainly does happen, but that's why we do the valuation first, so we're not investing a ton of time if we know we're not going to be able to come to some kind of understanding, right? And we, have a lot of hard conversations with people telling them, look, buyers are going to look at your agency this way, and this is what they're going to see. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing for you, but it is going to impact the value of your business. And so we have all those conversations as early in the process as possible. And sometimes we don't agree. We can't come to an agreement. And then we just, there's plenty of folks like me out there. You can try to find someone dumber than me.
It's like you've done this a time or two.
Yeah. The valuation process itself will look at, your last 3 years of P&L, your balance sheet, your employee makeup, your client makeup, your profit margins, your percentage of recurring revenue, how much the principal is paying themselves versus market, any expenses that would be considered add backs that we could argue would be one-time expenses or wouldn't be carrying forward through a purchase. We'll strip those out, and then we get to kind of an adjusted EBITDA number that we then apply what we think is a fair valuation multiple to. So depending on the size of the business and the answers to some of those other questions, positioning being one of the big ones, that'll determine the multiple. For agencies that we work with, it's usually between 2.5 and 8, I would say. And I know that's a pretty broad range, but there's a lot of factors. And that's kind of that's the very, very quick version of how we get to it.
Sure. It's hard to sum that all up into, a 2-minute answer when it takes 6 months to do
without a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So, one of the other things, we're putting a lot of emphasis here on valuation, but from what I understand, like the terms of your deal could actually be more important than the valuation up front. So I wonder if you just sort of talk about maybe some of the differences in terms and the way that terms can affect your actual outcome versus maybe just getting the best valuation. Like maybe you could actually come out of it a little better off with a different valuation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the valuation is, kind of a point in time measurement of what the firm is worth. But in professional services, because remember, there's no hard assets, it's just people and clients, you've got a decent amount of risk buying a firm. And so there's only a certain amount of money that a buyer is going to want to put up front, a percentage of that valuation. So that could be, in some cases 0%, in some cases 50%, in some cases 100%. That determination is one of the key kind of terms. And the other is, well, what is the rest of the money contingent upon? So, usually it's an earnout, which is where the owners are required to stay for 2 to 3 years. Maybe not stay, but their payments will come 2 to 3 years later, and they're contingent upon hitting certain targets. It could be retaining a key client. It could be hitting top line revenue targets. It could be hitting EBITDA targets. And all of that is negotiable. And then I think the third piece is what will the seller be doing in this new entity, right? So if they're going to be spending 2 to 3 years of their life now with a boss for the first time in a long time, they have to not hate their lives. And so negotiating, employment agreements, salaries, non-competes, all of that is a part of this as well.
Well, and for the existing employees, I'm sure like if they're building an app, for example, it got bought out or acquired, stock options might be part of it. Things that we don't necessarily think about that could come down the road, I'm sure play a big role in the actual deciding factor. I was wondering if maybe we could go down your story of actually trying to sell your brewery and why that didn't pan out, and did you take on partners because that didn't pan out? I don't know if that's too personal or a topic you want to go down, but firsthand examples kind of always the best when it comes to talking about issues and things. Is that something you'd be willing to discuss?
Yeah, it's not too personal. I will say I'm under, a pretty strict NDA, and so I can't share too much, and I don't want to skirt too closely to that. But
understandable.
I had business partners prior from the beginning, so I've had 2 business partners the entire time. The reason it didn't pan out was simply a leadership change at the top, kind of an unexpected leadership change. And for me, that's a learning that there's still a lot out of your control, right? You've got everything written down. You've got we had the press release written. We had negotiated employee salaries, and it just came down to a decision that was in no one's control, effectively.
Wow, that's got to be rather frustrating to kind of see the end in sight and have the rug yanked out right at the last minute. Do you how often does that happen? Is that kind of like a special circumstance, or is that a fairly common occurrence in this process?
It happens. Uh, I wouldn't say it's in the minority of times that something that drastic and close to the finish line would happen. But deals certainly blow up for many reasons before being finalized. You might uncover some yellow flags culturally, right, in the buyer, and so as a seller, you might back out. You might question whether or not the buyer is going to be able to fund the future payments of an earnout based on the way that they're running their business. You might just not be able to come to an agreement on the employment side of things. They might be expecting too much of you based on what you want for your own life. So deals certainly fall through for many reasons, but usually not that close to the end.
Sure. Yeah, it's got to be rough. So,
Yeah. I wonder, so we started to talk about, or we have talked a little bit about some of the steps that are a little bit deeper into the M&A process, things like valuation, that sort of deal. Maybe can we switch the conversation maybe a little bit to pre-work, right? So like when a company, there's probably plenty of folks out there who have aspiration to sell, but they're just simply not ready. So some of the things we've talked about are obviously applicable, getting yourself prepared. But from a punctuation standpoint, like what do you guys offer, or do you offer any sort of coaching to get somebody ready to be made sellable versus, you kind of already have a thing together. We just need to, put a little, shine on it and then it'll be ready to go. Like, I mean, do you take a business that's kind of in rough shape or is in shambles and help them sort of reset or get back to business?
Well, if they have money, yes, we will. No, the answer is still yes, we will. If they've got the drive to turn the thing around. We actually have a service called Prepare for Sale, which is designed for firms 2 to 3 years from an exit. And we'll go through, an in-depth benchmarking exercise, which is kind of an internal look at the firm. Then we'll go through a valuation exercise, which is an external look at the firm. And then we'll go through a future proofing exercise, which that module kind of varies depending on the needs of the seller and where they're trying to get. But, we might run scenarios or talk in more depth about, positioning or lead generation. We'll give them a 3-year kind of high level plan with bullet points on what they should be focusing on in the next 3 years in order to get their firm into the most, the best sellability that they can. And, given how much gas they have left in the tank, right? So we're not trying to push a firm past its limits, but what can you do within reason to make your firm more attractive and to kind of open up the pool of potential buyers?
Well, and to that end, I mean, do you guys go so far? I mean, I know you have plenty of hard conversations in your business. Do you go so far as to just flat out tell people like, this is not a business that is sellable? Like if you want to have a sellable business, like you've got to do X or start over clean or something. Like, I mean, have you, I guess, had to turn people away or assuage expectations that they've got a sellable business, even if they don't?
Yeah, we usually phrase it a little differently. We might say, we don't think we're the ones to sell your business. I mean, every business is sellable if you can find a sucker.
Sure.
And so, I wouldn't tell someone their business is unsellable, but I might say that, our database of buyers is not going to be as well suited to your type of firm. And frankly, you're going to struggle finding an appropriate buyer for these 3 reasons. So yes, we certainly have those conversations, and that's, why we collect fees up front, is so that we have the liberty to have those conversations.
Exactly.
Sure. Well, and from like a positioning standpoint too, I mean, part of that fee, I guess, is, I mean, of course, obviously you guys' time is worth something, but it's also kind of this emotional bit, right? Like if you're going to put this money in, like that's a way of showing that you're serious, that, or demonstrating that we're, putting our money where our mouth is, and we're going to do this by God. And I imagine there's plenty of guys that just hand over money and then actually don't really follow up. But I mean, at least as far as you guys are concerned, it's probably one mechanism for kind of making sure somebody's serious about growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. It shows that they're bought in from the beginning. And this is, kind of a partnership that we're willing to take the journey with you.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So one of the things that your business talks about, and that you guys have on your website that I think's of interest, is this notion of a total business reset, right? So we've been talking a little bit about just sort of the M&A process in general, and we've talked, a little bit about, how you might start this process. But this, I think, we could maybe use to sort of help people understand, when's the right time to actually seek help and that kind of thing. Because I think, there's a lot of businesses that, I don't know, maybe people are getting older and they're, ready to sell off, or they've got whatever reason that they want to get rid of a business. But I don't think a lot of people are doing or maybe understand when the right time is. And you talked about a little bit of pre-work, which is, you might take 2 or 3 years to get up to something. But is that an aspect of this total reset? Or, I mean, it seems like in the reset, there's other things like helping people, choose service offerings and almost rebuilding some processes inside the business.
The total business reset is really to help an owner build a business around themselves that, yes, could be sellable, but they might still have plenty of years left in the tank. And so the goal isn't necessarily to sell, it's to build a profitable business that's fun to run. And that looks differently for everyone personality wise. That's one of the reasons why we do actually, we do personality profiles for everyone in the business to help kind of guide some of those conversations. But oftentimes that will lead into an M&A engagement kind of further down the road as people understand the way that we think and the way that we work. And I guess they're okay with us making fun of them.
So I suppose too, as a piece of that, like benchmarking is one piece that we haven't really gotten into. Can you talk about like what benchmarking in a business even is and what that looks like?
Yeah, we're, looking at the way you run your business and your financials, your processes, and comparing that to this universe of similar firms. So at this point, we've looked at the insides of 1,500 firms and
wow.
Know the way that things should be done and shouldn't be done. And we kind of know what the firm averages are, but we also know what the best firms are doing. And so those are the benchmarks we try to use, are pushing people towards what we know is achievable. And that's usually around, some of the big costs, right, are people, right? So it's what are the metrics around how many people you should have versus your size, how highly are they utilized, and not just the billable people, but the unbillable people as well. How much cash should you have on hand given your client concentration and the makeup of your client profile? How much square footage should you need, and how much should you be paying for that square footage based on your size? And there's a slew of others that we look at, but they're more built to get you into an operationally really sound place so that anyone who would look at your business would say, oh, this is a really well-run business internally.
So do you you obviously focus on firms and agencies that are positioned to sell. Do you do other businesses as well, or do you avoid them because they're not your niche? Like, say, for example, someone built an app and it's doing okay. Is that a road you would go down, or you guys have found your route and your ideal client, and that's what you stick to?
We have found our route and our ideal client, but we don't say no. We just heavily caveat to someone who might be outside of that. But we've worked with architects, consultants, tattoo parlors.
Sure.
As long as they know that we're not necessarily experts in their field, but we can apply our expertise from this field to what they are doing. And we'll let them know if we don't think we're going to be able to provide enough value or not up front. So we do say no to a lot of engagements, but we say yes to some.
That's interesting outlook. Just define your client that you are going for versus someone coming to you to try and sell their business, and that kind of mindset's always interesting to me. Like, in the world of whatever it is that you do, who's your ideal client? Why do you go after them? And what motivates you in your business? And in your world of M&A and finding agencies to deal with, it's got to be interesting to kind of just sit back and have that 1,000-foot view of your client and what you're looking for. So if you were to describe your ideal client, like person coming to you, what would you say the key features are that you're looking for?
Marketing services firm, um, independent, less than 100 employees, and wants to be better and is willing to put in the work.
Sure. Why would you say that less than 100 employees is a key factor?
That's just where we have specialized. I think, that's our roots. My father had his own small agency and realized there were not a ton or any advisors for agencies back in the day. Now, there's a ton, right? But there still aren't a lot of really sharp, wise voices speaking to small to mid-sized agencies. The larger firms have kind of their own networks and different types of problems, the way that they're trying to scale. So we're trying to help people get from 1 employee to 10 employees, and then from 10 employees to 25, and from 25 to 50, and frankly to stop at the point where they want to stop, because not everyone wants to have a payroll of 50 people that they have to be responsible for paying every month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's interesting too, because I mean, just being in the agency business, I've heard similar breakpoints to that. The dynamics of an agency change pretty dramatically from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30, like what you need to know as an agency owner changes dramatically from, to sort of each of those breakpoints. I don't know if those are the exact points, but
yeah,
I've heard
that's
that.
not actually specific to agency. I'm taking that from building a brewery. I think that's just running a team. So any business where you're running a team, going from 1 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50. Certainly there's some dynamics that need to change in the way that you think about your role and the way that you structure your time and your team.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So you talked just a moment ago about your father's practice, and again, David Baker is obviously well known in sort of the positioning and expertise space. He's done a good job of positioning his expertise in that space. So, but one thing I kind of wanted to talk to you is just because I imagine this comes up on your M&A side, but also maybe in your personal experience with building punctuation with your dad. I wanted to talk a little bit about navigating partnerships and sort of the family dynamic. So I also, in some of the customers that come to you, no doubt you've had family businesses come to you, father-son relationships like what you guys have, or maybe, an entire family is a piece of the ownership and things like that. So what's it like sort of balancing, on your side, professional partnership with the family dynamic, especially given that, I'm much more familiar with your dad's work, obviously, but he, so how that influences sort of you guys before you got into or introduced the M&A piece to his organization. And then also, how do you guys do that as, or deal with family businesses on the M&A side?
Yeah, our dynamic is fun and unique. I think we both have similar ways of viewing the world, but also very different skill sets. And so we've kind of tried to focus on what we're good at individually and respect what the other people are good at. I think the key is really just open and honest communication as quickly as possible. So you don't want to let things build up, right? And we both agree that if we ever see this thing becoming something that might hurt our father-son relationship, let's just call it off. It's just not worth it. So just making, being aware of that dynamic and addressing it when necessary. We see all types of partnerships in the work that we do. Yes, familial. Yes, contentious. yes, folks that are getting along really well. And, you know, it does feel like we're stepping in as a therapist many times to, in some ways, mediate. But oftentimes, you know, we say the thing that one of those folks wouldn't be able to say and get away with.
Sure.
To ask the really tough questions and kind of let folks stew on the answers. And, we've had many engagements that start as total business resets and end as dividing the firm in two.
Yeah.
That's not uncommon, but everyone ends up in a better place at the end.
Yeah. Well, and I think you made a really good point, which was, I mean, even in your and your father's relationship, but just sort of in life in general, open and honest communication will solve almost everything. And so in the case of a family business, whether it's contentious or whether there's just many parties and they're having a hard time communicating or they're unwilling to say the thing that needs to be said, I mean, bringing you guys in kind of almost as a mediator or, you know, to use your word, like as a therapist, to be able to say the thing, you know, I've been thinking this a long time. I've relayed it to you, but now you can tell mom. So because I don't want to tell mom, you know, and you can be sort of that, unbiased outside person who's really just there for the good of the business. And so it gives you sort of this, I don't know, freedom. And to your point earlier too, you know, you've accepted money for this. So they basically bought you the opportunity to have an opinion here.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we're paid to read between the lines a lot of the time.
Well, we're kind of getting to that point. Thank you so much for making the time to talk with us. Any parting shots, places people can go to find you and reach out if they have questions or are in the process of maybe trying to sell their business?
We set up a webpage just for your listeners, punctuation.com/eggs. So if you go there, you can learn a little bit more about us. You can actually contact me directly, which is something I don't like normally to let people do. But
understandable.
But you seem like good guys.
Yeah, we're tolerable anyway.
Yeah.
But I would like to just compliment you guys too. You know, I mean, to the point of working for these small to mid-sized businesses, just on a positioning and a pricing level, like one of the things I noticed, and you know, for people who are listeners of this show, I mean, they know that I run kind of a smallish agency and that we've done, you know, or we've talked about it a lot on this show over the years. But looking at your pricing and things like that, you know, we're a small company, but your pricing seems within reach. But it's expensive enough, I think, to motivate people like me to, you know, invest in their business. But it's not so out of reach that I just couldn't do it. Right. Like, so, I mean, and I think you offer kind of a range of things too. You know, there's a lower dollar engagement that's a little bit more, I think, probably self-driven, you know, and maybe not as hands-on, but, you know, still great information. So there's sort of a range of products, I think, for people like me. So for people who have heard some of our other M&A guys come on that are Wall Street dudes that are doing, you know, $1 billion transactions or whatever, like, I think it's fair for people to take an extra look at punctuation specifically, you know, even if you're not in marketing, you know, in that niche, so to speak. But if you know, just kind of need to push your business to the next level, or if you're like me and you're a little bit scrambled and you're kind of that jack of all trades and you're looking for ways to narrow down, between the resources that you guys are offering at Punctuation, the writing of your father, and then just sort of the general advice that we can gain from working with people like you, I think you've really, you know, maybe I assume you meant this, you know, like you didn't just happen into it, but you've done a good job of positioning yourself for companies like ours who could, you know, use this expertise and maybe can't get to the next level without it. So I just kind of wanted to give you a little thumbs up or compliment on that.
Compliment accepted.
Excellent. You're good at that. So cool. All right. So punctuation.com/eggs. I'm also impressed you got punctuation.com. I don't know how that was still just out there to get. So that's pretty impressive.
Wasn't out there. Someone had it, but we offered a figure that we thought was low and they accepted.
Excellent. Well, no, it's a great URL. I love it. So anyway, punctuation.com/eggs. If you want to learn a little bit more, obviously you're on LinkedIn and all those kinds of places. So Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us, man. It's been awesome to sit and visit with you.
Absolutely.
All right. And thanks everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. See you guys next time.